The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Tonight is the Republican primary in Indiana. It's also the Democratic primary in Indiana. Ted Cruz said yesterday that it is neck and neck in Indiana. But do the polls support that? Not really. Let's take a look at what the numbers say. The Real Clear Politics average of recent polling in Indiana shows Donald Trump at just under 43%, Ted Cruz in second place at 32%, and John Kasich just under 15%. But Ted Cruz, I guess just saying, don't be confused by the polls, which for no explained reason he believes are wrong, Lewis, saying it is actually tied in Indiana. I guess you kind of have to say this. I don't know. The other possibility is just to downplay expectations and say, hey, anything we get is better than what we would have guessed. I don't know. But there's no real indication that it's tied tonight in Indiana.
Like in anything that's a competition where there's going to be a winner and a loser, even if you know it's not looking good, you have to say you're going to win, right? I mean, if you take the worst baseball team there is and put them up against the best, and they're going to say, well, of course we can win this game.
We can win. We can win is the politically correct thing to say.
Most players would even say we're going to win.
Yeah, well, that you hear a little bit less. But yeah, certainly we can win if we show up to play is the type of thing you often hear. Does it even matter, though? Because Indiana is winner take most for the Republicans. How are the delegates looking, and what does Indiana mean? Currently, we have Donald Trump in the lead with 956 delegates, Ted Cruz in second place with 546. Marco Rubio, even though he's been out of this thing for at this point feels like months, still has those 173 delegates he hasn't relinquished. And John Kasich, candidate number 3 with 153 delegates. Now, this is funny. I think you'll like this. Donald Trump needs, let's see if we can stay on that one, Lewis, because I did have a few more things to say. Donald Trump needs 281 delegates. That's about 56% of the remaining delegates. He can do that, but it is by no means a guarantee. Ted Cruz needs 691 delegates. Now, there's only 502 delegates remaining, meaning Ted Cruz needs 138% of the remaining delegates. He needs every delegate remaining and another 38% in order to secure the nomination. And Lewis, I find it's hard to get more than 100% of something where there's a limited number available.
It's actually impossible to get over 100% of anything, isn't it? I mean,
you can grow a business by more than 100%, right? Because you're not dealing with a fixed limit. But if you were going to buy that business, you couldn't buy more than 100% of it. No, you can only buy 100% right. of a business. Very, very good. And then John Kasich needs 216% of the remaining delegates. So those numbers certainly are not looking good. Of course, all the non-Trump candidates who have been mathematically eliminated from clinching the nomination prior to the convention, hoping for a contested convention. Trump has been saying if he wins Indiana, that it's over. If Trump gets all 57 delegates in Indiana, that will get him to 1,031. He would still need another 224, which is about 50% of the remaining delegates. So, Lewis, I don't see how, if Trump wins tonight, it's over, particularly if he only gets, half the delegates in Indiana tonight. I don't see that.
No. Unlikely. So, yeah, this is, what is this? Is this good news?
For who? I don't know. For the country, it's all pretty bad. Of the remaining states, Nebraska, California, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota, in that order chronologically for the Republicans, are winner take most. Otherwise, they're proportional. So that means if Trump can win all 286 of those delegates available in the remaining winner-take-most states, he will secure not the nomination. But Trump is right around 50% of California, in the lead. There is a path here, Lewis, for Donald Trump to secure the nomination prior to the Republican convention. And to that, as a non-religious person, I say, God help us.
Yeah, well, it's just great to watch, and it's a reality show. It's a soap opera. It's everything Americans love to watch on TV.
In an interview with CNN's Dana Bash yesterday, Cruz refused to say whether he would support Donald Trump in the general election if he were the eventual nominee, saying you don't just get to slap an R on your jersey and lead the Republican Party. And you know what? I agree completely with what Ted Cruz is saying. I think Ted Cruz is completely bonkers, out of his mind, bananas. But he is right that Donald Trump has put an R next to his name, but he has not lived a life of republicanism. He has recently found his supposed pro-life position. He has voted and supported for numerous Democrats. He has a policy that is indistinguishable from that of Bernie Sanders on the topic of Middle East dictators and U.S. intervention. I agree with what Ted Cruz is saying here.
Yes, I wish you wouldn't compare Ted Cruz to bananas. Bananas are great. Let's clear that up. Yes, Donald Trump is a relatively liberal guy, but there's no way he'd win as a Democrat. There's no way he could have just tried as an independent. So you have to stick that R next to your name.
Let's talk about the Democratic Indiana primary. Bernie Sanders says that there is a certainty about a Democratic contested convention. We'll talk about that in a bit. First, let's look at the polling in tonight's Indiana primary. 92 delegates are available. According to a Real Clear Politics average of recent polls, Hillary Clinton polling 50% tonight, Bernie Sanders polling 43.2%. Not 100% represented there. Some respondents supporting either a third candidate, fourth candidate, or unsure, but Hillary Clinton polling at 50%. So Bernie Sanders said yesterday that a contested convention is a certainty in the Democratic primary. Here's Bernie himself explaining that.
It is virtually impossible for Secretary Clinton to reach the majority of convention delegates by June 14th with pledged delegates alone. She will need superdelegates to take her over the top at the convention in Philadelphia. In other words, the convention will be a contested contest. We believe that we are in a very strong position to win many of these remaining contests, and we have an excellent chance to win in California, the state with far and away the most delegates.
How are the delegates looking? Now, we're going to do two analyses here, Lewis. One will not include superdelegates, and the other will. And this is as usual controversial. If we don't include superdelegates in calculating how many of the remaining delegates Bernie needs, people say, David, that's not realistic because the superdelegates do exist. They will have a role in the selection of the nominee. If we do include the superdelegates, then people say, David, why are you considering superdelegates who don't vote before the convention? So we will do both, and you can pick whichever analysis you like best. First, here is the Democratic delegate race without superdelegates. Hillary Clinton needs 720 more delegates. There are 1,206 delegates remaining, meaning Hillary Clinton needs just under 60% of the remaining pledged delegates. Bernie Sanders needs 1,016 delegates currently to reach that required number of 2,383, meaning he needs 84.2% of the remaining pledged delegates. Now, let's look at the numbers instead, considering that these superdelegates do exist, even though they don't actually vote until the convention. If we include superdelegates as so-called available delegates right now, Hillary Clinton needs, as I mentioned, 720 delegates, which would be 37.5% of the remaining pledged and superdelegates. Bernie Sanders needs 1,016 to clinch, and that would be 53% of the remaining pledged plus superdelegates. So the question is, are we focused on clinching before the convention? Because if we are, the superdelegates don't vote until the convention. It would be essentially impossible for Bernie Sanders to do that. Agree, Lewis? He's not getting 84% of the remaining pledged delegates.
Not going to happen, right?
However, if your argument is, well, Bernie can play the wooing the superdelegate game with some impressive performances between now and the convention, then yes, Bernie Sanders in that case would only need 53%, but Hillary Clinton would only need 37%, which seems very, very attainable. It looks way better for Bernie Sanders when we consider the remaining superdelegates in the available pool, but it also looks way, way better for Hillary Clinton in that scenario.
That's true. And when we, although this isn't tangible, when we think about the bias of many of these superdelegates, I don't like it, but they'll probably be voting for Hillary.
Lastly, how is California looking? A bunch of people have been sending me stories saying, David, Bernie is between 65 and 70% in California. I look at the polls that Real Clear Politics has decided are worthy of inclusion in their average polling data. Currently, those numbers have Hillary Clinton ahead of Bernie Sanders in California, roughly, on average, 51 to 41. Bernie Sanders polling best in the Fox News California poll, where he is polling 46%. It is quite realistic that with pledged delegates alone, Hillary will not secure the nomination. Bernie Sanders needs only 43, 42, 44% of the remaining pledged delegates to spoil the clinch for Hillary before the convention. And then we would indeed have a contested convention, Lewis, and then who knows what would happen.
I hope that happens.
Really?
Yes, of course, Dave. Dave, I want Bernie to win.
Right.
So that's all we can hope for.
At this point, that or people are talking about Bernie running as a third-party candidate. If he does that, it would really, really help the eventual Republican nominee be the next president of the United States.
Unless Donald Trump also does not get the nomination and runs as a third-party candidate himself. I
would be willing to bet any amount of money that we do not have third-party candidacies from both failed Democratic and Republican nominees. I mean, I would bet any amount of money, and I'm not a betting man.
Yeah, I don't think it will happen, but that would be interesting.
Send me your thoughts on this. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at lewismotamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Laura McKenzie. Laura, thank you so much for signing up. We value our members so much because without David Pakman Show members, realistically, the show would probably not exist anymore. And if it did, it would probably still be once a week or maybe twice a week. The reason the show is now 5 days a week is because of the support of members like Laura McKenzie. If you only have 16 cents a day to contribute to a membership, congratulations, that's all it costs. And you can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership, get instant access to all the great member benefits, including the world famous bonus show, an entire extra show just for our paid subscribers. davidpakman.com/membership. Lewis, this week's top Instagram pictures of mine also involve a very, very exciting announcement. Of course, I'm on Instagram at david.pacman, instagram.com/david.pacman. Here is the second most liked picture that I posted to my Instagram account, and I will describe it for those who are listening. This is a picture of Benjamin Dixon, the host of The Benjamin Dixon Show, sitting in the Lewis chair last night, broadcasting his show from David Pakman Show Studios. Indeed, Ben Dixon and his program will now be produced here at David Pakman Show Studios. This is very, very exciting, Lewis. And of course, apart from the technical abortion that was yesterday's attempt to broadcast his show, which ended up being cut down to 22 minutes at medium video resolution instead of an hour at high video resolution, I think that this is very cool, and it's great to have more programming emanating from the David Pakman Show studio.
Yes, it was a complete technical failure and disaster, but it was also a learning experience, and I'm guessing that a disaster of that magnitude will not happen again.
At least, hopefully not involving Ben's show, because I think he's probably had enough of the technical disasters after just last night. Now, I've already been getting questions on Twitter. Will the David Pakman Show now be monitoring the messaging on Benjamin Dixon's show? Do we have any editorial control? We have zero editorial control whatsoever over Ben Dixon's program just because he's producing the show out of here. We are providing production services to the Benjamin Dixon program. We are providing no journalistic communication, PR, or messaging services whatsoever. Ben can say whatever he wants, and I'm sure he will.
Yeah, if he wants to go all out hatred on us during his own program, He's more than welcome to do so.
Well, on Patriot Mail tomorrow, it's related to Benjamin Dixon and him when he guest hosted for me when I was traveling to Las Vegas. And then the most liked picture this week on my Instagram feed, David.Pacman, is me with my sneakers up on the desk and people wondering what this is all about. This was not part of the broadcast show. This is a still image from a recent bonus show where Lewis and I were comparing sneakers. They are similar but different. And people liking this, Lewis, and people commenting on my ankle socks, saying, why am I wearing ankle socks with my long pants? And yes, that was a mistake, but I had been traveling and laundry was overdue. And indeed, I committed the fashion atrocity, apparently, of wearing ankle socks with long pants. But, it's a look. I guess we could say that.
Many people very excited and aroused at the sight of your ankle, though.
It was titillating,
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I thought you were going to delve more into that with a broader narrative, but I guess not. Speaking of footwear, we have to talk about flip-flops and Hillary Clinton. Lewis, I think that may be the most cliche transition that we've ever had on the show.
What a segue. That's a good one.
So Hillary Clinton has been caught in an uncomfortable flip-flop on the issue of coal.
They got stuck in between her toes and it was very uncomfortable.
Yeah. You know this, Lewis. Hillary Clinton said she wants to end coal mining and coal miners, put them out of jobs, put them out of business. Take a look at the video from March.
Example, I'm the only candidate which has a policy about how to bring economic opportunity using clean, renewable energy as the key into coal country. Because we're going to put a lot of coal miners and coal companies out of business. Right, Tim? And we're going to make it clear that we don't want to forget those people. Those people labored in those mines for generations, losing their health, often losing their lives to turn on our lights and power our factories. Now we've got to move away from...
Pretty clear, right, Lewis? Coal miners are going to be out of jobs. Coal mining companies are going to be out of business. We're going to move away from coal. But yesterday, she was confronted by a West Virginia coal worker about those comments, and he was not happy. I'm speaking of Bo Copley, who says he's an unemployed coal worker, and he asked, in very emotional fashion, asked Hillary Clinton about those comments, and Hillary Clinton didn't know how to explain it. Now, that's not my interpretation. Hillary Clinton said she doesn't know how to explain it. Here is Hillary Clinton's response. We'll put it up on the screen for you from yesterday, speaking to Bo Copley. Do we have that, Lewis? We have that quote on the screen?
We've got to do a lot more on carbon capture and sequestration, try to see how we can get coal to be a fuel that can be continued to be sold and continue to be mined.
Okay, and then here is her broader quote about this. I don't know how to explain it, other than what I said was totally out of context for what I meant. Because I have been talking about helping coal country for a very long time. It was a misstatement because what I was saying is the way things are going now, they will continue to lose jobs. It didn't mean that we were going to do it. What I said is that is going to happen unless we take action to help and prevent it. Lewis, this is not good, right? I mean, she was very clear that this is going to be, she would be terrible for the coal industry. And now she's saying, no, it was a misstatement. What I mean is coal is going to prosper and coal is going to do well. I don't know what Hillary's position is on coal at this point.
Yes, when it comes to energy issues in general, there seems to be a lot of really vague statements and flip-flops. There are flip-flops all over the place.
Right.
I mean, Hillary must really love going to the beach. Fracking is kind of another one that she's kind of been inconsistent on.
And I want to distinguish between, I don't agree with being against gay marriage until it's politically popular to do it. Hillary Clinton was against gay marriage as recently as 2009. Now she's in favor of it. And some say, listen, she was personally always in favor of it, but it would have been very bad politically to say that in 2008. I don't respect that, but I understand it, okay? Calling the TPP the gold standard in 2012 and then opposing it in 2015, the world has not changed so drastically in 3 years that this type of monumental trade deal could realistically be seen as a good idea in 2012 and then as a terrible idea 3 years later. Saying in 2007 that a U.S.-Korea trade agreement was an unfair, bad idea, to saying it is a historic positive milestone in 2012, that's not about political popularity. That to me is just a straight up flip-flop, not about changing your fundamental view on anything. Excuse me, I'm getting worked up over this, on anything.
Yeah, it's a flip-flop, and it's kind of becoming Hillary's calling card.
And we've talked about it with regard to Keystone XL. We've talked about it with regard to lifting the payroll tax for Social Security contributions. In 2008, Hillary Clinton was against lifting that cap on the payroll tax. In 2015, she said she was open to it, which, by the way, is Bernie Sanders' position. Those are the ones that are impossible for me to even understand as mildly defensible. I'm completely against the flip-flop on the gay marriage thing with the explanation that it would have been political suicide to say it in 2008. I don't respect that at all. But like I said, I do understand it sort of intellectually. Hey, this is really weird. Carly Fiorina fell down on the stage at a Ted Cruz event. It looked like a trap door opened up in the stage. She just dropped straight down when introducing Ted Cruz. I'm going to play a couple angles of this for you. The most amazing thing is Ted Cruz doesn't even flinch. He notices Carly Fiorina is down on the floor, seemingly dropped through a trap door, and he just keeps shaking hands with supporters. It's amazing. Take a look.
Welcome. Your next first family, Heidi Cruz, your next first lady, Carolyn and Catherine, and the next president of the United States, Ted Cruz.
Man, I have another view where you'll see security come over and pick her up, and then she tries to get off the stage. She starts hugging Ted and his wife Heidi. The best part, there's two sort of key elements for me, Louis. The country music playing, which is so insane. Ted Cruz, the Hispanic Canadian, is playing down-home country music at his rallies. It just seems like such forced pandering. He probably really likes it, or at least has convinced himself that he likes it. And then just completely ignoring the fact that his running mate, who he has picked in April for who knows what reason, is on the ground, and he's just shaking hands. Take a look at this one.
So now, help me welcome your next first family, Heidi Cruz, your next first lady, Carolyn and Catherine, and the next president of the United States, Ted Cruz.
Oh, man. I love it.
Yeah.
What do you think, Louis? I mean, just priceless. And it's not funny that she might have gotten hurt, but the entire optics of this, and Ted Cruz with his creepy grin, just shaking hands. I imagine Carly Fiorina, like a turtle on its back there, with security picking her up. Just unbelievable.
I think those two kids who's she's shaking hands with, kind of towards the end before she leaves the stage, one of them seemed to think the whole thing was pretty funny.
And yet the one with the shirt that says "Keep calm and cruise on," which, by the way, is completely cringeworthy.
Yes. Well, the whole event is cringeworthy. Everything about this makes you cringe. But David, really loving this one.
Yeah.
Two different angles. I hear Dave's trying to collect. Dave's put out a call to anyone who might have been recording with their cell phones there. We need to see every possible angle.
I've been analyzing this thing like the Zapruder film, frame by frame. And here is Donald Trump commenting on it. And Trump is pretty funny on this. Take a look.
That's why we have deficits that are 19 trillion, and it's going to be 21 trillion very, very soon, with that really dumb omnibus budget. And you look at what happened with that. Then he picks Carly. Carly's perfectly nice. By the way, she fell off the stage the other day. Did anybody see that? And Cruz didn't do anything. No, it was even I would have helped her, okay? No, it's true. The weirdest.
It's the best. I mean,
Trump making a valid point. Yeah. Cruz didn't do anything.
All right, we got to go to break and try to regain our composure here.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Laura Reiley, who's a food critic who has been exposing and investigating food fraud in Florida, including most recently about so-called farm-to-table restaurants. Now, Laura, our TV audience will notice right away that we're blurring your face, which you've asked us to do. Is this, I know food critics who generally want to be sort of anonymous so that restaurants don't know when they go into a restaurant. Is that why we're blurring your face, or is it specific
Absolutely.
to this?
It's not because I have a face for radio, okay?
Is it because of that, or because of something specific to this investigation we're going to talk about?
Oh, nothing about this. Just ongoing. I mean, I've been a restaurant critic for about 25 years, and it's much easier to do your job if no one knows what you look like.
Fair enough.
An unfortunate part of the job, but there it is.
So let's start with farm to table. Farm to table is a concept that's increasingly popular. What do restaurants mean when they say they are a farm to table restaurant?
I think the shortest answer it means that they're sourcing locally. So they're working with local farms. And the word local itself is incredibly problematic because there's no legal definition and everyone means something different by it. That can mean within state boundaries or within a day's drive or within 400 or 800 miles. I mean, it really is a very wishy-washy term.
And there's another caveat usually, right, which is whenever possible with the products where
Sure.
this is realistically possible. So it strikes me sort of as like the all-natural term, which is of very little value in really figuring out what it is we're being promised or given, isn't it?
Yeah, I think with all these terms, sustainable, natural, responsibly raised, none of these have any kind of real teeth. There's no legal definition for any of it. There is for certified organic, but that's about the only term that has real, a real meaning. And because of that, it's a slippery slope. I mean, the average restaurant works with about 300 ingredients. And so how many of those ingredients have to be local for you to be able to make the claim that you're a farm-to-table restaurant?
Okay, so talk to us about sort of the logistics of your investigation, however you want to sort of introduce the audience to what it is you started looking into and how. I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So I've noticed in recent years, as a restaurant critic, I've always known that there are fibs that restaurants tell. You ask, oh, do you make your desserts in-house? And they say, oh, yes, everything's made in-house. And you know that dessert came off the back of a Cisco truck. I mean, that's a fairly common thing. But I noticed maybe 3 years ago here in the Tampa Bay area, and this happened sooner in other markets, but you started to see that creep of, it's almost like arms escalation. We source local whenever possible with farm names on the chalkboard and on menu items. Heirloom tomatoes from Farmer Brown or pasture-raised pork or all these things. And about maybe 2 years ago, I started wondering, well, how often is it correct? And I also do a lot of agricultural writing in the state of Florida. And I noticed more and more that farmers were grousing about essentially being used as billboards, that they would sell their pasture-raised pork to a restaurant, to the kind of the latest celebrity chef restaurant 3 or 4 times, get on the chalkboard, then the restaurant would stop buying from them and that name would never come off the chalkboard. And the small farmers, they don't really have any recourse, I mean, they don't want to be crabby with these restaurants, they don't want to complain. They want to stay in the good graces of the high-end restaurants. And they certainly want the publicity with the public to have those items on the menu or on a chalkboard. But they're losing out in 2 ways if a restaurant is misrepresenting. If they're buying commodity pork and pawning it off as Farmer Brown's, obviously that's money that's not in Farmer Brown's pocket. But then it also is muddying his brand. You go there and you eat that $40 pork chop, and you say to yourself, it's not. I don't know if that's worth $40 when in fact you've just eaten a commodity, $6 pork chop.
And talk to us about sort of the procedural of how you did this. I mean, if I were doing this and I didn't, I would imagine I go to the restaurant, I see what farms are being mentioned, then I go and I actually talk to the people at those farms. And then if they tell me, actually they haven't bought, that restaurant hasn't purchased from us for months, maybe I'd go back to the restaurant and sort of ask them about it and see if there's some kind of explanation. How did you work this?
You would be a great investigator. That's exactly what I did. So I would go to a restaurant, eat a meal, steal a menu, photograph the chalkboards, and then just start making phone calls. And in some cases, it was driving out to the farms or the cheese producers or whatever, because they don't want to be whistleblowers. So they were a little bit, there was a lot of let's go off the record. So it took some wrangling to get some of these small farmers to say, yes, I'm willing to say that I have not sold to that restaurant in 3 or 4 months.
Were there cases, though, where there was not even any instance of purchase? In other words, you described, well, they may have purchased the eggs from this place for a month, but then they stopped or whatever. Were there times where you would go to a farmer or a grower or whatever, and they'd say, oh, no, I've never sold anything to that restaurant?
Yes, it was on a continuum from honest mistakes to wholesale fabrication. And there was a lot more of that than I anticipated.
Wow.
There was one restaurant here where they have a big, beautiful chalkboard outside, in the parking lot, basically. So, you go to the valet, you give them your keys, and you look at the chalkboard and you say, wow, all these farmers, this is amazing. Well, I started calling, and for instance, there was a fisherman listed who was supposedly selling them snapper and grouper. So I called him and I said, I'm doing a sourcing story. I want to talk to you about your relationship with Boca. And this angler said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even know what a Boca is. So I said, oh, well, you're on their chalkboard as providing snapper and grouper. And the guy said, I'm not legally allowed to sell direct to restaurants. And B, I don't even catch snapper and grouper. So there's some really interesting misrepresentation going on, and some of it does seem kind of outright lying.
So talk to us now about the reaction from some of the restaurants that you called out. We're going to link to your TampaBay.com article about this. What have been the repercussions from what you've written?
Well, no one likes to be called out, so I'm sure I'm not the most popular girl in the Tampa Bay area right now. But pretty much all of the restaurants that I called, their response was kind of like, well, yeah, you're right. We need to change the chalkboard, or we haven't updated the menu, or yeah, that's a problem.
Sort of like clerical errors.
Kind of. I mean, there were some where they recognized that they had been caught in a lie. For example, there's a restaurant called Pelagio. It's actually a very good restaurant. A lot of these restaurants are exceptional restaurants. And I actually think the chef at Pelagio does a lot of great work. But they had Florida blue crab on the menu for a long, long time. And in fact, we had it DNA tested, and it was swimming blue crab, kind of a lesser species that's from the Indian Ocean. So completely wrong side of planet Earth for that representation there. And he said immediately, okay, I'm changing the menu right now. And that's what a lot of them did. There are also some interesting upshots from this. For instance, that restaurant Boca that I mentioned, they hired a liaison person, kind of a forager person to negotiate between the restaurant and the farmers, and then also to act as a kind of the person who gives transparency to the public. So there's like an insert in the menus now that gives full transparency about the provenance of the food, and this guy's responsibility is precisely that. So I think there could be some very good things that come of it.
So that gets me sort of into my next question, which is we've talked about fish fraud on the program, which is you go to a restaurant, you think you're getting fish A, it's actually fish B. Rarely does it work in the consumer's favor in that case, right? But in some of the reports I've read, the restaurant doesn't actually know that they're serving something different from what they claim to serve. In other words, they've been deceived or misinformed, as the case may be, by the supplier, the middle person in the chain. Did you consider that possibility in your investigation for some of these cases?
I spoke to a number of restaurateurs who said that happens quite frequently, and that, for instance, a gentleman who owns a series of fish restaurants in this area said, well, I got a good source for Nantucket scallops. And I bought a couple gallons of them. I used them. They seemed a little funny. And I read the fine print, and it said Nantucket style scallops from China. So I think that is a very frequent occurrence, that the delivery person either is pulling a bait and switch, or they don't know themselves. I mean, the whole supply chain, fish is difficult because it doesn't come with a barcode. It's not possible to look at a white, fillet of fish and say, oh, it's clearly not grouper, it's bassa, for instance. And I think a lot of reputable restaurateurs, for this reason, choose to buy their fish whole, because it's much easier to tell species with a whole fish where you see its scales, its fin structure, etc. So I think that there are some ways to be a little smarter in your purchasing.
Hey, in the last bit of time we have, how do you get blue crab DNA tested? I mean, do you pull out a microscope and petri dish at the restaurant, or do you sort of like stuff it into your purse and then hand it off to a scientist? How does that happen?
I spent a lot of time stuffing baggies of fish into my handbag, so I'm still waiting for the paper to buy me a new one. It's a little fishy in there. But yeah, anytime I saw a fish representation that seemed a little sketchy to me, I would tuck things away. Often in a sushi restaurant, you get a sushi roll that they say, oh yeah, it's grouper, and you look and you think, that looks like tilapia, or tastes like tilapia to me. So I went to the University of South Florida marine biology people, and they basically sent the specimens away to a DNA lab, and they get basically some coding back, and then they have to match the coding with species. And there were a number of times where we found misrepresentations that way.
All right, Laura Reiley, food critic, exposing food fraud. Thanks so much for sharing this with us. Really great work.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Microsoft founder and multi-billionaire Bill Gates has said that investment gains, should be taxed at the same level as ordinary income. This is really controversial in many worlds, and he was on CNBC's Squawk Box yesterday. He said that he was pleased that there's more discussion around changing the tax code. And when he said what he would alter or change, he agreed with Warren Buffett and said the earned income tax credit should be increased, but also that the tax rate on capital gains should go up. And this is relevant because for the very richest of Americans, much of their income is not coming from labor, right? From W-2 wages, but rather from capital gains on investments. And the current top tax rate on capital gains is 20%. The highest earners pay an additional 3.8% surtax. Compare that to the top tax on ordinary income, which is at 39.6%. And Bill Gates said there's always been the question of whether taxes on capital should be a lot lower than taxes on labor. I tend to think they should be pretty much the same, and that's an opportunity to be a bit more progressive. So what's the underlying principle here? It's really important to get this. A lot of people say, I'm against higher taxes on whatever. I'm against lower taxes on whatever. You can disagree or agree in terms of the logic, but we should all understand what the logic is. If you raise the tax rate on investment gains, that makes investing money less attractive, right? Meaning you're creating a disincentive to let money sit in stocks or in mutual funds or whatever, and you're encouraging people to do other things with that money. If the tax rate goes up on capital gains, you might say, well, hold on a second. If I'm going to pay more on money I make with the money sitting in stocks and mutual funds and hedge funds and whatever, I'll take some of that money out and invest it in a business where it now becomes deductible. It is now a business expense. I'm investing it in a business. And maybe the business will get me bigger gains. I'm not going to pay the taxes on the money that I invest into a business because it's tax deductible as a business expense, if you're directly involved in that business, of course. And I actually might make some money off of that business. So you're encouraging investment in business, where that's sort of the underlying principle here. Now, the super rich have ways of reducing their capital gains anyway. There are mechanisms including trust holdings, offshoring, many other paths that the very rich have access to. But we're talking sort of generally about the economic principle. This gets us to another economic principle of the economic multiplier effect. Different types of government spending have different economic multipliers. Now, tax cuts or a tax reduction or an artificially low tax rate, or a low tax rate, artificially maybe is the wrong word, on a type of gain is a type of government spending. If you give a tax cut, you're reducing government revenue. That's equivalent to the government spending money when you look at a ledger. When this was studied, it was determined that, for example, food stamps are one of the most stimulative types of government spending with the highest multiplier effect. First of all, food stamp recipients are likely to spend every dollar in food stamps that they receive, so you're not going to have a high savings rate. And then there are going to be types of spending which then really have a multiplier effect. You're going to local grocery stores, which are buying their groceries from distributors that are at least regional, et cetera, et cetera. Conversely, tax cuts on capital gains or a reduction in the income tax rate for the very rich are very low stimulus. If you're very rich and you get a slight reduction in your tax rate, you're probably just going to save that money. It will not be reinserted into the economy. Whoa, as I punch my mic here, in a stimulative way. So this is the logic, right? And we can, only if we understand the logic, Louis, can we really have a conversation about this.
Yeah, and it's still highly debatable. I mean, how you think it'll work, how that money invested in business versus the market will translate to government revenue.
Sure. What type of business are we talking about? Many questions.
Yeah. So, I don't really know what side I fall on here.
If you disagree with Bill Gates, tell me specifically why, from an economic perspective, you think it would not be better for the economy to have a slightly higher, at least, capital gains rate. A huge civil rights victory, Louis, in U.S. ally Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabian brides will now be allowed to have a copy of their marriage contract. And people say women aren't respected in Saudi Arabia, Louis. Previously, only men were allowed to have their marriage contracts. Now women will be allowed to have a copy. Unclear whether they'll be allowed to read it, but they will be allowed to have a copy.
Mm-hmm. And I've been struggling to figure out why this was not allowed before.
Yeah.
I can only think to myself that there are certain things written into this marriage contract that perhaps the men thought they didn't need to know.
Well, are women allowed to read it before they sign it? That's really the question.
I really doubt it.
No word on whether they will need permission from a male guardian to read the marriage contract. They were getting tired of having to teach their wives all the duties outlined in the marriage contract, where now they said, we're going to allow women to have a copy. They can memorize it by themselves so they can start right away serving their husband's needs. The some Saudi Arabian agency, who knows which one, said the decision took into consideration that a woman would need a copy of the marriage contract if there was a dispute with her husband in court, for example. Somehow I don't know that having access to a copy of the marriage contract is going to put women on an equal level with men in Saudi courts.
No, I don't think so. But nevertheless, a very small victory for women in the country. Women
do still need, in Saudi Arabia, the permission of their male guardian to be married based on the Saudi Arabian extremist interpretation of Islamic law. They also need their male guardian's permission to travel and to work. And of course, they need to be covered from head to toe when in public. This is one of the U.S.'s closest allies. But Louis, you sort of sarcastically said, any victory is a victory. Maybe we shouldn't mock this because it is minor, but when things are so backwards as they are in Saudi Arabia, maybe a bunch of these incremental changes, even being able to ride bicycles by yourself with your male guardian's permission, maybe we should really support even these seemingly ludicrous and mundane changes in the right direction.
Calling them baby steps would be a huge overstatement.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really, we talk about small steps. This is pathetically small.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it does seem to be that the country is becoming slightly more progressive.
Saudi Arabia is liberalizing. Women are now entitled to see the contracts they are forced to be party to if they want to get married after being given permission to marry by their male guardians. That's a liberalizing move in Saudi Arabia, and the alliance, the friendship with the U.S. continues. I have a voicemail number which you can call anytime you want. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Yesterday, we talked about requirements for men and women to serve in combat in the U.S. military. Here's one comment I received. I don't know if this is for real.
The only thing I can think of that you may have missed on the requirements for women and men is that if the job requires an 8-minute mile, the women should also have to pass the physical requirement while she's on her period.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a joke. As from the women I've spoken to, Louis, menstruating has not impacted their ability to run. I've never met a woman who said it does, but I don't know.
I could tell that the caller started laughing towards the end there.
You think it was
smiling? Yeah.
All right. Who knows? We've received stranger calls, that's for sure. On today's bonus show, Kim Jong-un, the fearless leader, the marshal of North Korea, has banned all weddings and funerals, at least temporarily. California has scrapped John Wayne Day because of his racist past. And Berlin, Germany, has banned full apartment Airbnb rentals. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Do not miss the bonus show. The bonus show is the best thing since sliced artisanal bread. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership to get instant access.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.